On today's video, I'm going to go over my favorite slip bobber setup for walleye fishing. Hey there, outdoor YouTubers. It's Dave Knetter from Knetter's Practical Outdoors. And you know, I really love to slip bobber fish for walleyes. You know, over the years, I've been fortunate enough to catch quite a few walleyes doing that. It just seems like a good technique for a lot of the lakes that I fish. And, you know, I think it really can shine in certain fishing situations, you know, especially with neutral fish. You know, you got that walleye kind of laying there on the bottom. He's kind of in a neutral mood, right? You can run a crankbait over his head, doesn't even flinch. You can bounce a jig by him, doesn't even move. But I'll tell you what, if you can drop a slip bobber and a leech and get that leech into his field of view, right? Get that leech into his field of view and just have it sit there and wiggle. And you know, eventually that walleye's just going to say, you know what, that's so easy, I'm just going to swim over there and eat that. I can't pass that up. It's just too easy. So, you know, I think it really can be a great technique, especially for neutral fish, you know. But slip bobber fishing is not a coverage technique, right? You know, if you're fishing a big, vast mud flat and there's just fish scattered here and there with no rhyme or reason, that's probably not the place and time to be slip bobber fishing, you know. But if you were to mark a pod of fish holding off of some structure somewhere, that'd be a great place to drop a slip bobber and a leech on them. Or if you feel really good about a gravel pile, maybe you mark some fish on a gravel pile, that'd be a great place to drop a leech and a slip bobber on them. A patch of weeds, maybe a brush pile, you know, places where you really at least either see fish on your locator or feel like fish really should be kind of concentrated and kind of in a smaller area. Those are great places, you know, to drop a slip bobber and a leech down on some walleyes and see what happens. Alright, well, let's go over the setup that I like to use when I'm slip bobber fishing for walleyes. And we'll get started with the pole itself, okay? This pole is 8.5 feet long, you know, which some of you might be saying, gee Dave, we're just bobber fishing, you know, what are we doing with this big long pole? And, you know, the long pole is nice for a few reasons. Probably the most important one is the hook set, you know. When you're bobber fishing, you're casting the bobber out, leaving it sit for a little while. Sometimes you get a little bit of slack line, you know, in the setup. If you think about bobber fishing, your line leaves the tip of your pole, goes out to a bobber, and then goes down. So you don't really have that direct line from the tip of your pole to the fish's mouth like you do, like say if you're casting a crankbait or something. So oftentimes when you go to set that hook, there can be a lot of slack line, you know, in between the tip of your pole and the fish's mouth. And it really helps to have this longer pole to kind of pick up that slack in the hook set, you know, and get a good hook set. Like I said, this is an 8.5 foot pole, medium action, you know. There's a lot of good rods out there. This one happens to be a Browning, but you know, there's a ton of really good rods out there. But it does help slip bobber fishing. It really does help to have that nice 8.5 foot rod. Okay, now the next part of our setup is the fishing reel. Okay, I just picked up this reel the other day. I'm going to put it on this pole for slip bobber fishing. This reel is a Shakespeare Excursion. I think I paid like 20 bucks for this reel, right? And you know, and I've talked about this in other videos, right? This is Knetter's Practical Outdoors. This is not Knetter's I'm sponsored by Daiwa or I'm sponsored by Shimano Outdoors. This is Knetter's Practical Outdoors. So anytime, you know, I can save a few bucks and not really sacrifice function, hey, I'm more than willing to do that. And I do believe the reels you use for slip bobber fishing are one of those places where you can get by with a little more inexpensive reel. Okay, now if you think about it, you don't need 10 ball bearings in this reel because you're not going to be casting out crankbaits and burning them back all day. You don't really need a high speed gear ratio. Again, you're not casting and reeling steady all day with them. Generally speaking, you're casting out A lot of times I'm opening the bail, setting the pole down in the boat, and waiting for the bobber to go down. You know, if the materials used to make this reel aren't super lightweight, it's not a big deal. You don't got to worry about wrist fatigue, again, because you don't have this rod in hand all the time. So really the only thing I'm looking for in my reels that I pick out for slip bobber fishing is I do like to have a little bit bigger spool. Okay, you know, I wouldn't want to go with like a teeny spool like this. You know, I'd much rather have this bigger spool. I think you can get a lot better casting distance out of it. And, you know, of course, you know, a nice smooth drag, you're going to want that. And really, other than that, a pretty cheap reel can get by real well for this slip bobber fishing. Now that we've got the reel on the pole, we're all set to put some line on it, right? And I really like to use this Berkley Fire line, okay? And I would highly recommend that you do use some kind of a no-stretch line when you're slip bobber fishing. Either a braid or a fusion, you know, like this Berkley Fire line. You know, it kind of comes back to the hook sets again. You know, a lot of times you've got a lot of slack in the line when you're bobber fishing. You know, you go for that hook set. That's the same reason we wanted that long pole. We want to be able to pick up that slack and use that long pole to pick up that and get a good hook set. And it's the same thing with this no stretch line. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen how much stretch there actually is in monofilament, but if you've never experimented with it, go out sometime and run about 50 feet of mono off of a spool, tie it off to something rigid, and then go to the other end and pull on it. It will have a lot of stretch to it, you know. So I try to stay away from mono, you know, when I'm slip bobber fishing. And, you know, don't get me wrong. I've caught a ton of walleyes slip bobber fishing with mono. It works. It's fine. You'll catch fish. But I do think you're going to get much better hook sets by using a no-stretch line. So, anyway, so I like to use fire line. Today I'm going with 14-pound test. And, you know, I'm not going to fill this whole spool up with this fire line, right? Fire lines, it can be a little pricey, you know. Again, this is Conetter's Practical Outdoors. So I'm going to put a little bit of backer on this reel first. You know, I got some Trilene XT 25-pound test. I'm gonna put a little bit of that on this spool first before I put the fire line on. I don't want to use up this whole spool just on this reel. I think I can probably use about half for this reel, maybe half for another one, you know. Like I said, it's Conetter's Practical Outdoors, right? And yeah, this XT, I bought this XT some time ago. You know, I don't really care to use it for a main line. You know, I didn't care for it too much. It's kind of rigid. You know, this XT stands for extra tough. And that's not to say that I don't like Trilene. You know, I love using Trilene XL for a main line if I'm using mono. You know, that's the XL stands for extra limp. You know, and I really do like that. And you know, I know some of you guys are like, whoa, XL, extra limp, XT, extra tough. I want to use the extra tough. I don't want nothing to do with extra limp, you know, but relax, guys. We're just talking about fishing line, okay? So I'm going to put a little bit of this XT on here first, and then we'll put the fire line on. All right, so we got the line on the reel, right? We got our 14-pound test fire line on the reel. And, you know, if you're curious at all about putting line on a spinning reel, you know, if you've, you know, maybe had trouble doing it in the past, maybe you've been experiencing a lot of line twists, I did do a video about that, okay? Again, go to Conetter's Practical Outdoors, go to my fishing line playlist, and there's a video titled, How to Put Line on a Spinning Reel. There's another one titled, you know, Putting Line on a Spinning Reel, Is the Myth True? There's another one titled, Putting Line on a Spinning Reel, Is There a Wrong Way to Do It? Okay, I got like 3 videos that just kind of deal with putting line on a spinning reel. You know, the first one titled, How to Put Line on a Spinning Reel, that's probably the best one. If you got any questions about putting line on a spinning reel, that's certainly the one to watch. Alright, so our next step is going to be to get the bobber stop on the line, okay? And you got to do this before you put any other terminal tackle on, okay? This needs to be done first because you're actually going to thread this line onto the stop. Today I'm going to be using a 2-hole plastic style of bobber stop. This particular brand is called Speed Stop. It's made by this Arnold tackle company. And a lot of times I call that style dog bone style because they kind of look like a dog bone. Just a small plastic stop to have a hole in each end. You thread the line through one hole, wrap it around, you know, the middle of the stop, and then out through the next hole. And they work real well, and I'll kind of show you what that's about. But first, one thing I like to do, a lot of times the ends of this line, depending on how you cut the line off, can be frayed, you know, like with braid or fusion. It can kind of frayed on the end, or even with mono, the end of the line can be kind of squished, you know, where you cut it, depending on how you cut it. So one thing I like to do is to take a really sharp knife or a razor blade like this, set the line down, and kind of cut a small piece off the end at an angle, okay? And what that does is it kind of brings the tip of the line to more of a point, and it becomes easier to thread it through the small holes on the bobber stops. So that's just a little thing that I found works real well. Alright guys, we're going to thread that stop on the line so it kind of looks like it does on the picture in the container. Alright. So we're taking that little stop, that little 2-hole dog bone style, and we're going to thread our line on it. We'll go through once. Okay. See how it's through the hole one time. Okay. And then I'm going to wrap it. And I'm just going to wrap it once. Okay. And then I'm going to come back through the second hole on the opposite side. Okay. So I really only wrapped it once. The picture on the container shows like, you know, 2 or 3 wraps, but that's too many. You really only want to wrap it around one time and come back through the opposite side that you entered. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to slide this up and down your line. And again, if you want to see, you know, how to put some of the different styles of bobber stops online, again, go to my video, how to rig 4 different styles of bobber stops. You know, check that video out and you can see how some of the other ones are done. But anyways, next thing I want to do, I just want to slide this down the line and just kind of get it out of our way for now. Okay? Next step, we just want to thread one of these little beads on the line. Okay? So now we've got our stop and our bead. And now, lo and behold, we can put our bobber on. Okay? I really like using these Thill slip bobbers, and I really like using the unweighted ones. Okay? With the grommeted end. The grommeted end keeps from grooves being cut in the bobber, you know, from the line passing through it all the time. And the unweighted, I did talk about that in another video, my other slip bobber video that's titled Slip Bobbers, Tricks for Setting the Depth. I talk about why I don't like to use the weighted ones, so I won't really get into that here, but if you're curious of why, check out that video. But anyways, these bobbers, they just thread on too. You run the line right through them. You know, you put the grommet toward the stop, and there, we've got our bobber on. Alright? Now the next thing I like to do is to put a swivel on the line. And then we're going to transition into a different line for our leader material. Then, off of this swivel, I like to attach a fluorocarbon leader. Okay? I'm a big believer in fluorocarbon. I use fluorocarbon leaders for almost all types of fishing that I do, whether I'm casting crankbaits, whether I'm jigging, whether I'm slip bobber fishing. You know, and on this setup, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put some 14-pound test fluorocarbon on there. I just use this Berkeley Vanish. Works really well. I think you can get away with a little heavier pound test because of how difficult it is for fish to see fluorocarbon under the water. And if you're at all curious about why fish have a difficult time seeing fluorocarbon underwater, I did do a video about that. Again, go to Knetter's Practical Outdoors, go to my fishing line playlist, and the video is called Why Can't Fish See Fluorocarbon? Check that out. I have a special guest on that video that's kind of educated in that area, and he kind of explains the science behind why fluorocarbon is difficult to see underwater. So go ahead and check that out. But anyways, I'm going to put 14-pound test, Vanish fluorocarbon. I'm going to put a leader on there, probably 14, 18 inches. Alright guys, like I say, I've got my 14-pound test fluorocarbon leader on here. And I might even go as heavy as 20-pound test if I'm getting bothered by a lot of small pike, and maybe I'm kind of risking getting bit off by a lot of small pike in the area I'm fishing. I'll go as high as 20-pound test fluorocarbon. Like I say, the properties of fluorocarbon under the water make it really difficult for fish to see. I really think you can get away with a little heavier pound test. Alright, so we have to add some kind of a hook system to this, right? What are we going to put on the real business end of this? And a lot of times that's going to be dictated by the size and type of bait that we use. Generally speaking, 90% of my slip bobber fishing for walleyes involves leeches. Usually medium to large leeches. That's probably my favorite bait to use. If I am fishing late into the fall, I will go with minnows. But like I say, 90% of the time I'm using leeches. So 90% of the time I like to go with these Gamakatsu walleye wide gap hooks. Either size 2 or size 4, depending on the size leech. They're a really, really stiff hook. I really like that stiff hook. I don't want much flex in that hook. Again, it comes down to those hook sets. Walleye's got a really hard mouth. When you go to give it that hook set, you don't want that hook to flex when it's down there in that walleye's mouth, like maybe an Aberdeen style might. These are really good stiff hooks, super sharp right out of the package. Those Gamakatsu walleye wide gaps, they are super sharp right out of the package. And another thing about them is they're really a light hook, okay? And I think that gives the leech a little bit of freedom, a little bit more freedom to swim around and not being drugged down by this heavy hook. So I do like to use those walleye wide gaps. Okay, so I tied on a size 2 walleye wide gap, alright? And this is going to be a real good setup for fishing in clear water, okay? But the one time that I'll deviate from this is if I'm fishing stained water. And sometimes I like to add a little bit of color, in and around the hook. If I'm fishing stained water, just a little something extra to catch the fish's eye instead of that black leech in stained water, So sometimes I will go with a small jig, maybe with a little hair on it to add a little bit of color, maybe even a plain small jig, or even just a hook, a colored hook just to add that little bit of color. The only thing, if you do go with a jig, try to go with a very small jig, maybe like a 1/16 ounce or less, I don't want that walleye to come up there and grab that leech and feel like the bulk or weight of a heavy-headed jig, So keep the jigs pretty small, if you can, really lightweight, but don't get them so small where that hook starts to get too teeny, okay, or you're going to miss a lot of fish. You're going to pull that teeny little hook right out of the walleye's mouth. It's sitting in the walleye's mouth. It's got a leech on it. If that hook's too small, you're just not going to get the hookups like you want to get. Okay, one last step, and I hope you didn't think I was going to forget this. We're going to add a few sinkers to this, alright? And I really like to pinch the sinkers on the main line, in this case the fire line, okay? And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add just enough weight to this, so maybe about from here up the bobber is sticking out of the water, right? We don't want this much of the bobber sticking out of the water, you know, but we probably don't want only just this tip sticking out of the water either. That's going to be really hard to see out on the lake, okay? So I'm going to add just enough weight so when this is sitting in the water, maybe the water line comes up to about here. And that's going to be a real good setup. And that's kind of why I waited till the end to add the sinkers, because, you know, that's going to change everything up if you go ahead with one of these jigs instead of a plain hook. That's going to add more weight, so you might have to shuffle the amount of sinkers you have on the line up a little bit. But anyway, so I'm going to pinch these sinkers on, and I really like to, again, pinch them onto the fire line in this case. The fire line is super resistance to abrasions, so you're really not going to beat the line up by pinching them on. And you know, and these two sinkers, this is probably a good place to start. And once I get out on the water and I set this rig in the water, then I'm going to see, I might have to add one more, you know, maybe a smaller one than those. Like I say, I want this bobber to be maybe sitting about that far out of the water. I want the water line right about there. I don't want too much resistance. When that walleye comes up and grabs it, I want it to be real easy for that walleye to pull that down. I don't want him to feel a thing. So match your sinkers to your bobber. Well, there you have it, guys. That's one of my favorite slip bobber setups for walleye fishing. You know, it's caught me a lot of fish over the years. Certain situations, it really works great. And you know, if you've never tried slip bobber fishing, go out and give it a try. Again, in certain situations, it works real good. And hey, guys, also remember to hunt, fish, laugh, repeat. This is Dave Knetter from Knetter's Practical Outdoors. Hey, thanks for watching, and God bless.
Song about fishing.
Fishing. Daddy, you touched that fish, Dad? You touched that fish?
I caught that fish.
Yeah?